We all have that one Oscar snub that we're still thinking about today. Gets under your skin, it bothers you. Today, I'm talking many Oscar snubs. What is up, Flick fans? Welcome back to my channel. So a couple of weeks ago, we did a bit of an Oscar redo where we chose movies and actors nominated for that specific award to win over the ones that actually won, if that makes sense. In today's video, we're looking at the snubs, aka the individuals, the movies that were not even nominated that particular year. And we're focusing on the 2010s, of course, that's in the title. But man, I look at some of these, I'm just like, now, the goal of this video isn't to bring down the movies and the actors that were nominated, so I'm not going to focus as much on that, right? Some of them I could, start to tear down. Not going to do that. I'm just going to talk highly of the individuals and the movies that were not nominated for that award. Some of these are personal. The ones that I focus on towards the end are the ones that I think a lot of people agree on, and I would love your comments down below. Who got snubbed? What year was it? What award was it for? There are so many to talk about, and I guarantee I left a lot off this list, so apologies. If you enjoy these Oscar-centric videos, be sure to smash that thumbs up button. I would love to do more and do other decades. Let's get into some honorable mentions first. Some of these you're going to be like, what's that? That wasn't even in contention. You're probably right, but I wanted to highlight them somehow. Let's start with Michael B. Jordan, not only for Best Supporting Actor in Black Panther, but for Best Actor in Creed. Claire Foy in First Man. I thought she gave one of the best female performances of that specific year. Timothée Chalamet in Beautiful Boy, not as strong on that one, but it's definitely one to consider. Won't You Be My Neighbor? Best Documentary. Guys, this movie wasn't even nominated, and this documentary was incredible. How about Michael Stuhlbarg in Call Me By Your Name? One of the best performances I saw that year. Emily Blunt in Sicario. Any Denis Villeneuve movie, obviously, but she specifically in that film blew me away. Tom Hanks. I mean, we look at Captain Phillips, and maybe it's not what we think of when we think top-tier Tom Hanks, but man, oh man, he's better, or at least close to better, than he had been in quite some time. Ben Affleck for Best Director for Argo. Argo, didn't that win Best Picture? Yeah, and guess who wasn't nominated for Best Director? Ben Affleck, and it won Best Picture. Adapted Screenplay. Not really a super popular category, but I think of Perks of Being a Wallflower. That's one for me that really stuck out that year. Didn't get nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay. If we get into the animated category, we look at a movie like Tangled. I love Tangled. Maybe even over Frozen, didn't get nominated for Best Animated Feature. If we look at some of the movies that have been nominated over the years, like Boss Baby and Ferdinand, that category just always blows me away. I said I wasn't going to bring people down. I'm not going to do that. Sing Street. I didn't include this on my list because it wasn't as highlighted that year as maybe I wanted it to be, but Drive It Like You Stole It for Best Original Song, maybe the best song of that year, and for me, Best Picture. I mean, it could have easily been the Best Picture of that year because it's amazing. Okay, but let's get into the ones that aren't honorable mentions, the ones we're going to talk about a bit more. And we're going to do this by categories, or really by chunks. Let's chunk them all together and start with the performances. So the first performance I want to highlight here is Andrew Garfield in The Social Network. What Garfield managed to do is, one, come on the scene and I think blow everyone away. A lot of people think of him as one of the Spider-Men, maybe even the worst live-action Spider-Man, and I definitely think he showed some skill in that department. But I think by far the best acting, well, he did Hacksaw Ridge, and he was phenomenal in that. But The Social Network, man, I thought he could have won Best Supporting Actor that year. A little long not even being nominated in that category. It's ridiculous. And that year in particular, we obviously look at The King's Speech, beating Social Network. But one thing that was not highlighted in Social Network is the one thing I would look at and say, other than Fincher's directing, maybe that's the best performance, even over Eisenberg, because of how much he steals that film and just delivers on that dialogue, man. Andrew Garfield, one of my favorite performances of the decade. Another performance that was completely looked over that year, and this is a guy who has constantly been getting the short end of the stick, whether it's Prisoners, Enemy, Zodiac. I mean, Jake Gyllenhaal is incredible, but Nightcrawler, how in the world Did he not? I'm just thinking about it. Even if you're not the biggest fan of Nightcrawler, see, that's the distinction you have to make between best performance and then how the movie ended up being. I'm a massive fan of Nightcrawler. In my top 10 of that year, I thought the movie was fantastic. That on top of the fact that his performance not only carried that movie on his shoulders, but it gave me everything I wanted to see from him to cast him in multiple roles. I mean, that year I'm thinking, oh, Jake Gyllenhaal could be the Joker. Jake Gyllenhaal could be Batman. Jake Gyllenhaal could be anybody. And a lot of it comes from this one performance. I mean, year after year, the guy just delivers, and then he's always being overlooked. And I say this all the time. It doesn't come down to just what you do, right? You have to be just as good as everyone else who is just as good. But I look at the other performers nominated that year, and I told you, I'm not getting specific, but, okay. And these next two may not be as popular for some, but I think some people will agree with me in the fact that Adam Sandler got snubbed this past year. Now, you know, the performances for Best Lead Actor were good. There's no denying that. And a couple of them, I mean, there's no way I would take him out. Adam Driver, Joaquin Phoenix. But Adam Sandler, just rejuvenating not only his career, but the perception from multiple people. Now, obviously, didn't get nominated. So there are those that still look at him and say, well, and there was an article that came out, by the way, and we still don't know the validation behind that, but, well, he does these silly movies on Netflix that are horrible. And you make a good point, but we're not judging those movies. We're judging Uncut Gems. And his performance in Uncut Gems, I get it. Not everyone loves the film. It is crazy. You're on the edge of your seat the entire time. You're almost out of breath by the end of the movie. But performance-wise, I love it, by the way. Performance-wise, Adam Sandler delivers. He's up here when he needs to be. He's subtle when he needs to be. He's over the top. He's scaled back. Everything you want from an Oscar-winning performance. I wouldn't have chosen him to win, but I would have chosen him to be nominated, and he wasn't. Another less popular choice, but James Franco in The Disaster Artist. Now, this is where we veer into, what happened behind the scenes, and I think this is a big part of the reason why Franco didn't get nominated for that award. And then you look more into it, and you're thinking, but isn't it about the performance? I mean, I get it if you do something drastic, right? Certain actors have done things in the past. I'm like, yeah, never nominate them or just cast them again. But James Franco not being nominated for The Disaster Artist after winning and being nominated for multiple other awards when an award show, I can't believe I'm about to say this, when an award show is supposed to be unbiased. Okay, the Oscars, let's face it, they're really biased. I wish they weren't. I would love to see an argument saying they were. They are. It's the truth. And you could tell when they didn't nominate James Franco for The Disaster Artist. And, you know, it's not the best performance I've ever seen, but it was so spot on. It captured everything you wanted about Tommy Wiseau and his presence. And there was passion behind it. And I felt that passion. And I thoroughly enjoyed that movie, one of my favorites of that year. But his performance, I thought, was just as good as most of the performances nominated, if not better, and I was shocked when I didn't see that nomination that year. I really was. All right, we've talked actor and supporting actor. Let's talk actress and talk Amy Adams for Arrival. Listen, I loved Emma Stone that year. She was probably my favorite performance, but just creeping up on her heels was Amy Adams in Arrival, my favorite film of that year, and it all rides on her shoulders. I keep saying this, but that's what you want in a lead or sometimes a supporting actor or actress, is the fact that the movie just works because of them. Look, Jeremy Renner was fantastic. Denis Villeneuve, obviously the direction here is almost flawless, and the score just brings it all together, but who is at the forefront, who is the focus, and who is just giving you every bit of emotion in the world, her relationship with her daughter, how that story comes into play. When you see her come to certain revelations, you're with her, you're rooting for her, and then that gut punch at the end, and it's everything you want it to be. Man, oh man, I mean, I think this is possibly her best performance of her career, and she wasn't even nominated. No, she's been nominated multiple times, but Arrival is the biggest snub ever for Amy Adams. And then maybe the OG, the ultimate snub. And this could be because the Academy doesn't like horror. Well, they nominated Get Out, Austin. Well, Get Out had a bit more behind it to get that movie nominated. Hereditary, let's face it, is not an Oscar-friendly film, even though it's a critic family-friendly film, less so an audience-friendly film. There are a lot of people who don't like Hereditary, but even those people who do not like Hereditary, I don't see an argument when someone says, well, Toni Collette wasn't that good in Hereditary. I just don't see it. Look, all movie opinions, that's what they are. They're opinions. Nothing's factual here. I may look and sound like I'm trying to back things up with factual evidence. I don't have that. I have my thoughts on the matter. I just don't see the other side of the picture. I don't see how you watch Toni Collette in that movie and say, oh, she's not a good actress. Some of the best and most dynamic and range-filled acting I've ever seen in a horror movie. Ari Aster alone pushed this movie beyond what it could have and should have been, frankly. But Toni Collette, especially, we look at the dinner table scene, we look at her response when the thing happens with her daughter, we look at the ending and just the craziness that is being portrayed from her character, the ups and downs, and the fact that it was, I believe, the best performance of that year. All the way around. All of the people who won, nominated, this and that. Toni Collette, in my opinion, was the best performance of that year, and nothing. And I'm sitting back just, nothing? What? Okay, funny enough, I have less passion here than I did the acting category, but I do want to talk about some of these movies that were not nominated for Best Picture. The first one is Warrior. And maybe it's recency bias because I just watched this past weekend. It is one of my favorite movies of all time. In my top 50, I think the film is just incredible, completely underlooked. And I look at Gavin O'Connor as a director, and from that to The Accountant to The Way Back to Miracle, I'm just like, this guy is always on point. But Warrior is his magnum opus. Warrior is everything I want. It's a good brotherly story, a father-son story. I love both of those things, and in this movie they are combined. But it's also one of the best fighting/action movies in that vein that I've ever seen. The way the narrative is constructed, and then that final hour of this 24-hour fight session with all of these people, the way it's handled. A couple of times it's a bit on the nose when it comes to the UFC elements, but this movie wasn't nominated for Best Picture, guys. And I was telling my dad, I'm like, what was nominated that year? And then I started to figure it out, and I'm like, oh, but I think of 2011 and I think of Warrior. Does anyone else feel that way? You may not feel that way, but I don't think of anything else. I think of Warrior. I've already talked a bit of A24. I want to throw some of these movies in. I mean, it feels like every year A24 is just getting the short end of the stick. I mean, obviously Moonlight won Best Picture, and that's fantastic, and it was one of the best pictures of that year. But we look at other years, and Hereditary, we just talked about it, didn't get a nomination. Eighth Grade, one of my favorite movies of that year, a revelation in terms of bringing in a comedian, Bo Burnham, to direct something like this. A beautiful movie, didn't get nominated. The Florida Project, speaking of beautiful, one of the most visually stunning and real films I've seen in a long, long time, didn't get nominated. A24 is just consistently getting the short end of the stick. Even last year I think was one of their best years. Midsommar, The Last Black Man in San Francisco. So many great films, a lot that I'm forgetting, but A24 in general, they're getting snubbed quite a bit. They've had their victories, for sure, but some of the other years, they get the short end of the stick. A couple of other films I thought should have been nominated for Best Picture. Let's just talk 2017. We hit on The Florida Project, that was 2017. Logan and Blade Runner 2049. Now, you're going to look at me, and you can see all this comic book stuff, and you're going to say, of course he wants the comic book movie to be nominated. Now, we're talking 2010, so I ain't getting started on The Dark Knight. But I think Logan was Best Picture quality. I think compared to some of the other movies nominated that year, movies that will forever be forgotten and no one will ever bring up ever again. Now, a lot of the films nominated that year I was happy with. But Logan is just better, in my opinion, than some of those films. It is just a better, more well-structured movie, and I truly believe, with Mangold behind this film, directing, by the way, pretty freaking solid, if it wasn't based on a comic book, and it wasn't about Wolverine, and he didn't have those claws, with just this story and the way that it was handled, I think it would have been nominated. So, a little bit of bias into that? Absolutely. Another film, Blade Runner 2049. Didn't get nominated for separate reasoning. I think a lot of people just didn't think the movie worked pacing-wise. And that's a completely valid criticism. I don't think there's any bias that goes into that. I just wholeheartedly disagree. I think, he's Denis Villeneuve, of course. Yeah, man, he's my favorite director, so I'm going to fend for him when I get the opportunity. I just think it's so much better than the original. I know, that's just the way I feel. I think it's better than the original. I think the story was just so tight and well structured. I do think it suffers from the pacing when you look at how other people are judging it. Again, I think the pacing is perfect, but comparing it to some of the other nominations that year, I get it. I understand why it wasn't nominated, but I look at it as a sci-fi masterpiece. I do. I truly think it is. I think it's visually stunning. I think it's technically stunning. I think the score is incredible. The acting, everything you need for a Best Picture nomination. Blade Runner 2049, unfortunately, didn't meet those qualifications. I mean, I thought it did. And along with that, I have Denis Villeneuve for directing Blade Runner 2049, which I think is the best directing job of that year. Throw Mangold in that category as well. I think the biggest directing snub, or at least one of the biggest of the 2010s, is Christopher Nolan for Inception. I mean, he finally got his with Dunkirk. It took him long enough. I mean, you could make the argument for an Interstellar. I'm slowly coming around on that movie as one of the absolute best of that year. It gets better with age. It marinates like crazy. But Inception didn't need that time to marinate. Everyone already knew it was one of the best movies of that year. And it got its due with Best Picture, even though it didn't win. But I truly believe Nolan's direction is the reason why that movie worked. The cast, yes. Leo, absolutely. The score, incredible. The visuals, great. Nolan keeping this a tight-knit, tight-running ship with the script that just delivers on every aspect that you need it to, firing on all cylinders. I don't know how he didn't get nominated that year, and I may be forgetting some. There have been director snubs every year that I'm slightly upset about, but for me, the biggest is Nolan for Inception. And then the final thing is just a smaller subject, but I talked about how some of these animated movies get nominated. You just scratch your head. I've never even heard of that film. It's got like a 40, 50 on Rotten Tomatoes. Why is it getting nominated? And then you look at the fact that the Lego movies never got nominated. I just don't get that. Is it the type of animation? Is it the stop motion style? I mean, no, we've seen stop motion movies get nominated before. I don't get it. I see no reason for why, especially the first Lego movie. Maybe not as much the sequel. There were some pretty good picks that year. But the first Lego movie, and then Lego Batman. It happened 2 times. What is it? I don't get it. Rotten Tomato score, super high. Everybody seemed to love the first movie. The voice cast is great. Much better than some of the other animated movies that year. Much better than most of the ones nominated. So, what happened? That's my question. Now, obviously, this is one big opinion-based video, but I need you guys down below. Do you agree? Do you disagree? That's absolutely okay. And I love seeing your all's thoughts, your responses, and your movies. Did I miss a movie? Did I miss a director? I know I'm going to read some of these comments and go, duh, right? But I tried to be as thorough as I possibly could. And are there some smaller categories, such as, Best Original Screenplay, Best Song, Best Soundtrack that I missed out on? All of those things. I appreciate you guys for watching. Once again, thank you for supporting this video with your thumbs up and your comments. And let me know what decade you'd like to see next. You guys the best. I'll see you later.